Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights, covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and, with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Welcome to Nightlight, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. We really appreciate your taking your time to spend with us. We know how precious it is, and so we're very aware of the gift that you give us when you do listen. I want to thank first Ken Quiethawk for his amazing intro. You can find him at nativestorytellers.com. He and his wife have an amazing website there, and it helps to show how the First Nation people kept their children aware of their history and their cosmology, the way that they revered the earth and the spirits around us. And it's a profound way and a better way, I think, of preserving history than we do today, because it grew with their culture as opposed to being stagnant in time. Mark has a great show for you tonight. I'm looking forward very much to the two gentlemen that he has with him. I think it's going to be a very exciting show. I keep paper and pencil ready. You may want to take some notes. I know I've got mine all set. So, Mark, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here and bringing your great guests with you.
Well, thanks for having us on, allowing us to return after a few mistakes here and there, but we keep moving forward despite our blunders. Yeah, how's your week going?
So far, so good. Yeah. How about you?
That's all right. Just get, might as well get started here. It's just almost running late. Since we're doing punk archaeology tonight, I had to run down to the courthouse and change my name to Mark Rotten.
I think I buy my vegetables from him, Mark. You might want to think of another last name.
Okay, you can tell. We're like 2 minutes into the show, and it's already out of control. It's who knows where this one's going. But yeah,
somewhere in a handbasket, I think.
Yeah, my two buddies are with us for the next maybe couple hours, and could be cut short if you hear the black helicopters and battering rams and sirens. But Dave Sheldon and Rob Whitworth are here. We've challenged the traditional interpretations of archaeological sites, and Dave and Rob are documentary filmmakers focusing on hidden and unique aspects of history. They've traveled extensively for this project and have interviewed several of the people who have been guests on Nightlight. Their website is roadtoruins.com. That's road, the number 2, ruins.com. And you can check out their informative videos and numerous photos hopefully after the show, you want to hear all their information. And our show a couple weeks ago covered ancient canals of South America, and I think Joan's information laid the foundations for this Central and South American theme we're developing. We'll probably be able to weave some strands from that ancient canal show to this one, and Dave and Rob are going to lay the foundations for another South American show we will be doing on Friday, December 27th. So that one's going to be a really neat one too. So so we have this little South American, Mesoamerican theme developing. So welcome, Rob and Dave. How are you?
Excellent. We're great. We're glad to be back.
Okay, so Dave, what do you mean by punk archaeology? That's right there on your website. What do you what are you conveying by using that term?
Hopefully a sense of fun, at the same time a sense of get out and look in your own backyard. I mean, we talk about neither of us is formally educated in archaeology or anthropology, nor do we claim to be, nor would we ever represent ourselves that way. I just thought it was kind of a fun take on words, and we both kind of grew up through the punk scene. We're fans of punk rock, and it just kind of fit because punk is DIY, do it yourself, get out, go, don't sit behind the TV 10 hours a day, get off your butt, go outside and go look. You'll never know what you'll find. And I know it's a little bit off track, but along those lines, recently out here where I live in the woods, I live in a site. I didn't even know there were petroglyphs here when I moved out here. I just knew that I belonged out here. And I looked at several sites out here. I'm 45 minutes from pavement. I'm totally off grid. And I kept looking at this ridge, I saw a few things that were highly unusual as well in the sky around this ridge, without going into extreme detail. One being, a thunderbird. The other, a Hopi elder conveyed to me, was a healing kachina. And it inspired me to go hike this ridge, and I got to the top and I found 2 stone rings. And I sent my Hopi elder friend the photos, and he confirmed that that is an ancient healing site. And I know this was populated by the Hisatsinim ancestors of the Hopi, because that's the nature of the petroglyphs that exist no more than 3 or 4 miles from me on the way here, right off the roadside. So I walk out of my backyard and I find arrowheads, pottery. It's crazy. If I had more time, I'd be doing that all the time, walking around staring at the ground, which isn't hard during the summer because we have rattlesnakes. But it's just, if anything, to me, it's an example of, what's out there. And I went up there with a magnetometer, actually, to measure the electromagnetism. And I know that you're familiar with Burke and Hallberg's, Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, from 2006. Well, Rob and I picked up a magnetometer to take to the UK and go measure the ancient sites over there. I still had the thing kicking around, so I figured, well, what the heck? Let's go see. The topography makes sense. There might be some action up there. And I measured 496 milligauss around these circles in probably 8, 9 a.m. in the day. So sun rising, morning, it's going to be more active. But that was full almost 100 milligauss higher than the readings we got at West Kennett Long Barrow. And supposedly anything over 300 causes, quote, adverse physiological effects in the human body. So you never know what you're going to find. Be a punk. You don't have to follow the rules. Go look. Go see what you find. You never know what's going to be out there.
Okay, so get out and explore, and just don't sit in the classroom and take the authorities, what they have to say.
Okay, to a certain extent. I mean, those folks are highly educated, and I don't mean to disparage them at all. I mean, what they do is very important, and they're really good at digging into the ground and telling you what these people ate 5,000 years ago, and that is important. They're putting together the story. But I've always advocated, and I think Rob would back me up, that you need a full approach. I mean, you need a multidisciplinary approach to all these ancient sites in order to fully understand what's going on. You don't see archaeologists out there with magnetometers, maybe LiDAR, but, you need to use different tools and see with different eyes and open your mind bigger than the textbook. And I think that's a problem that we have in our educational system is that, oral tradition, by the way, I love the plug you gave at the beginning for oral tradition. That is definitely the way knowledge gets handed down. And anybody who knows anything about...
Yeah, I wanted to tell Barbara that was outstanding. Thank you.
It was. Thank you, Barbara. And anyone who knows anything about oral tradition knows that, I mean, you take the word of an elder is the word. That's what is. I would take the word of any elder over a textbook. Some guy sitting in an office, who has, maybe an editor looking over what he's doing, but can write with whatever bias he wants or she wants. That to me that's not education. That's just carrying over bias generation to generation. And then look where we've gotten now. I mean, you can actively watch our history being destroyed right now. So the next generation won't know how we screwed up. And we look back at all these failed civilizations and we do know how they screwed up and we're still doing the same thing.
Okay, so it's, you're taking more of an indoctrination approach by the establishment.
Well, more or less. I mean, if you're an academic, you need to publish or perish. If you want to get money to go do your research project, you've got to base it on what was done before you. You can't really go outside the box and get paid to do it. You just can't, and academics are tight, and then you've got the independent researchers, and a lot of them are really tight with their research. In a perfect world, everybody would just throw everything out on the table and try to figure it out. But, there's too many special interests out there, and that's really a shame. And, I think Rob and I, it's one of the things that we try to take out of everything we do is that we're unbiased. We don't know. And we're the first ones to admit we don't know. We don't know. The only thing I know for sure is that I don't know anything. but I tell you, I've seen some things. And I've seen some things that don't make any sense at all with the paradigm that we've got running right now. Just don't make any sense at all.
Okay, so I don't know, might be a good segue into having Rob explain the premise of your video series.
Well, the premise of the video series is actually explained in the first 30 seconds. Dave wrote this great intro that essentially revolved around tracing the tracks of our ancestors to learn from our past before it's too late, which is exactly what we've been trying to do. Pay attention to those that came before you, that potentially committed errors, who learned and are now willing to share that information. Unfortunately, again, this is not academic information. It requires being in the presence of someone who had that tradition probably handed down orally, who's able to relate the history of their culture and what occurred with their peoples. Before I move on to that too much, though, what I wanted to touch on, because you'd asked Dave about the punk ethic, and it didn't get pounded home hard enough that it needs to be a multidisciplinary endeavor on the parts of the academics and the colleges. I have a library card. I'm quite proud of it. I spend a lot of time at the local library, and I've come to know a nice lady there. She and her husband were academic researchers, Chaco Canyon, Southwest, in the 60s and 70s. I won't bother saying which college that they were employed by, but they made the mistake of walking across the hallway one day to, I think it was the biology department, and asking them, could you possibly do some research on these remains? And they were told that their career was basically over if they didn't get out of that college, because you never walk across that hallway. And that's one thing we've got to learn. Everybody has to put their heads together to solve any kind of a problem, to figure out a solution to whatever endeavor it is we as a group of people need to get sorted out. And if it's just one group of people, the academics with an agenda, and just like Dave said, publish or perish. You've got to fill those seats. You got to fill that classroom. You got to do that next book tour, and that's not working for us.
Okay. Well, along those lines, Judge, I could add, we had the opportunity to interview a nice man, a nice family, a nice man. I won't get into details, but I've been wanting to air this for a long time because it really stuck in my craw. This guy's Harvard educated, and he leads the anthropology and archaeology departments for a major U.S. university. And he, on camera in front of us, when we asked him about oral tradition, he likened it to the telephone game. That's not an educated man. And that's dangerous. That's frightening. This is what he's perpetuating into students, college-level students across the country who are getting into that field.
Yep.
It's a shame.
Yeah, and we also had the opportunity to interview, and it's acceptable in this instance to offer his name, Clifford Mahooty, who is an elder of the Zuni tribe. And we were having a discussion, and I think most of it ended up on film, but we were talking at length about oral tradition and how you learn that manner and your elders kind of nurture the youth. And he made it very clear to us that was the manner in which he was raised. He's an engineer of some type now, I believe, or he was professionally before he retired. But he made it abundantly clear to us that the most important thing within the body of that process is you're not allowed to walk away until you can prove that you have memorized the information. It has to be committed to memory. You have to prove that you can recollect it and then offer it on to somebody else that wants to learn the same thing. This isn't like a scratchy telephone call. This is sitting in front of your elder on your knees, begging for information and being fed everything you need so that you can keep your culture alive.
Yep.
Okay. So
bit more than the telephone game.
Yeah, and okay, how about we get into your recent trip to Guatemala, and we can come back to Four Corners area and the very lengthy traditions there, and see if there's like some kind of cultural connection. So let's just put the Hopi material on hold for a little bit, and let's get into. Both of you made you just got back last week from another trip to Guatemala. What was the purpose of this trip?
Joy. Quite simply, Rob, my dad passed away a year ago, and he came up and helped me deal with all my dad's estate. I was the executor, and it was a mess. And Rob came up and really helped me through a hard time. So we decided, when this is all over, what are we going to go do to celebrate and have fun? And the first thing on both of our minds was getting back to Guatemala. So that was the genesis of the trip.
And then the next thing it could have been a relaxing time. The initial intention was to head to Antigua, the old capital of Guatemala, and just spend a week. And then I thought, we're only a few hours away from Honduras. We should go down and see Copan. And since we're going to do that, let's hit Chihuahua. And the next thing you know, we hit 5 different ruins on that trip. And some of these places I had been to in the past about 9-10 years ago. And at least in one instance at a place called Papalicapac, which is where the Maya very likely first encountered the Olmec and got their system of astronomy and mathematics passed on to them. There was a huge excavation going on, conducted by a university at the time, that they had like these 8-foot panels, like these metallic roofing panels, like aluminum roofing panels up around the whole thing so you couldn't see in. They had tarps over the top so that even if somebody flew over from a plane, they couldn't get any photos. So I was intrigued to go back and see what it was exactly they had found. So the trip turned out to be more of yet another archaeological ruin site type of thing. And in this particular instance, Yeah, it's what we're into. And yeah, what in this instance, what they had found that they didn't want anybody seeing as they excavated it out of probably about 20 feet deep was an Olmec head. Very similar to the ones found in Veracruz. They're in Tabasco at the very bottom, the very southernmost part of the Gulf of Mexico. Pretty much the same thing.
But very different, kind of crude looking.
Well, the ones that, if
Rob?
I'm not mistaken, the ones in Veracruz were basalt, and they were never buried. This was a softer stone, more of a sandstone, limestone type thing, kind of like they used at Kirawan, Copan. So the stone is much more, when it's exposed to the elements, even just weather, it washes away. And I'm guessing all those years in the ground didn't treat it well.
So,
Right.
Rob, okay, so we have the Olmec culture, and that's a African culture making, doing naval engineering to cross the Atlantic. They're arriving in Mesoamerica, mingling with the Mayan people. Okay, do we have like a time frame? Then what was the how did the culture change after you have two different types of people getting together?
Well, first of all, there's no conclusive evidence that it did indeed come from Africa, other than the appearance of these heads and of the artwork that they have left as representative of themselves, and then the Maya then represented them as well. They not only have features of people who would have been from more recently Africa, but they also toned their skin in the same manner. So the Olmec were definitely in wherever it is they came from, whoever they were. Like we say, we don't know, but we're going to keep trying to figure it out. But they were in Mesoamerica long before the Maya people ever presented themselves. So this particular location, which is only about 30 miles from the Pacific coast in Guatemala, is most likely the place where those two cultures met. Now, we know that the Maya were warfaring. They were feudal states. They fought against each other. That may have been more ceremonial, and we can get into that another time. It might not have been a genuine war, but it was more just guys futzing around on the basketball court. They liked to fight. It's just what they did. It was ceremonial. Again, different discussion. Regardless, the Maya picked up astronomy, mathematics, and some different types of writing and hieroglyph from the Olmec. And at this specific site, you see both of them represented right side by side. As far as the timeline goes, that place was occupied. I mean, we could go way back, but it was definitely occupied by the Olmec about 1200 BC, so well over 3,000 years ago. It was the pre-classic period of the Maya when the Maya started to move into that area. So we're talking maybe 400 to 600 BC. So they'd been there. The Olmec had been there for about 800 years before the Maya ever encountered them. But continuous, verifiable occupation for 3,000 years at that site.
Okay,
and an amazing site.
It is an amazing site. And one thing that we figured out, I mean, it's cool to go to these sites and see what parts have been excavated, which is usually, as a rule, only a small fraction of what actually exists there. So we were heading out of the park that afternoon, and we spotted this huge topographic map. I mean, this thing was, what, Dave, like 25 feet by like 12 feet?
It was a big one, yes.
It was a whopper, and it showed what the place would look like if it were indeed all excavated. And what we noticed in that moment is it's at a V between two rivers, just like the places in Veracruz and the other places that we know the Olmec occupied. They like to build between two rivers.
Okay, and Calvin, river question in a little bit. You know, one of the places you've visited that you just mentioned, but I wanted to touch on that. It sounds I've heard a little bit about it. Was Copan, and what did you learn about that site? There's a famous altar there what's the story behind that? Rob, you want to take that one?
Yeah, Copan is in Honduras, and
Okay.
like many of these places, the names that they end up with is much like what you were conversant with the Adina and the Hopewell. It's the guy that owns the farm that people finally go out and do the research on, and that's where the name comes from. The actual name of that town, which I can't recollect, in the dialect of Maya there, which I think is Chorti or Chorti, the Chorti people still live up in the mountains. It quite literally means corner, kind of like Rinconada. That is the southernmost corner of the Maya territory. And the thing that makes Copan really cool is there's a couple things that make it really cool. For one, in most instances, the Maya people built over other structures. This was not considered hiding them or concealing them. It was to protect them. So if I decide that I want to build a house because Marquetti used to live there, I leave your house, but I build it over the top because you're my friend and I want to take care of what it is that you did. Same thing happened there, to the tune of what you're presently seeing above ground level is the sixth creation. You got a tunnel way down, like I think it was like 90 feet down. They found a thing called the Rosalia Temple that there's a recreation of in the museum there, which is outstanding and worth seeing. And it's one of the ways that these archaeologists, where we do really give them credit, were able to realize what kind of paints and pigments and what these buildings looked like when they were new, because it's preserved perfectly inside 5 other pyramids above it. So that's pretty impressive. I think what you're referring to as far as the sculpture goes, there's a thing there called Altar Q. I could do like 4 hours on it, but to break it down, the guy that started Copan, the Copan King Dynasty, Kanishak Akmo, in 432, of course, passed on. And he's buried down under those 6 pyramids. But the 16th leader decided that he wanted to make sure that everybody understood that he was in direct lineage of that king. Turned out to not be the greatest king the place ever had. As a matter of fact, he essentially buried it in the post-classic period. But he had this altar made that showed all 16 rulers within the middle of the part that you initially face when you encounter this thing. On the left-hand side, you have the guy that founded it. And on the right-hand side, grasping the serpent rod that's being passed to him as a symbol of power, is the 16th ruler. So the whole point of the thing was to simply, it's propaganda. It's just like politics now.
Yep.
Make the people aware that I come from there. That I'm actually receiving this flaming sword from, the guy that started this place. And then he proceeded to bury it, and the place was pretty much abandoned by like 800 AD.
Okay, so basically nothing's changed with power structures.
Well, as far as the Maya go, there's one thing that's always puzzled me, and that's that, at some point they did learn ritual sacrifice, which if you do your research, pretty much every historical peoples at one point or another practiced it. It's just such an intelligent people with astronomy, mathematics, science, that they would still behave like that, much less such strong religious beliefs that found their way into their system. But as I started to say a moment ago, the thing that puzzles me the most is that as far as bloodletting goes, that was the elite. They didn't pick people out of the crowd and force them to suffer. They tortured themselves to keep the people well, to perpetuate what it is that they perceive that the gods gave them. That's kind of an intriguing thought, because that sure is not the way things work now.
No.
Rob was just talking about this altar Q, and I come across a lot of these articles where this new cluster of pyramids was discovered in the Amazon basin by the use of LiDAR and other high-tech gadgets. Are the places you're visiting all the structures have been exposed, or are just more and more of these temples being found? For someone like me who's never been there, are these pretty open, areas, or are they still heavily forested around the sites?
The combination.
Okay.
A combination of both. I mean, a lot of the sites have been cleared. And you got to remember too, back when these were active, I mean, they had plazas, huge plazas. There was no trees at all. I mean, there was structure, plaza. It was a city, like a modern day city.
Okay.
And that was one of the downfalls of the Maya, at least in Belize. We learned that from an archaeologist, Jaime Alway. Great guy who did some great research and found that the Maya were victims of their own success, that they deforested at such a fast rate to accommodate their growing population and actually industrialize agriculture that they changed their environment. And I think you see a lot of that going on now. So there's another lesson we didn't learn. But yeah, there's kind of a mix. There's some sites they've allowed the jungle to retake a bit, or at least allowed the trees to stand. Koba, you get these nice walkways under trees. Tikal is probably my favorite, just for feel alone, because the jungle's come back, the birds are there, all the critters are around. You've got monkeys everywhere. Pretty cool place, but all these sites are incredible. I mean, Takalika Bosch, I mean, God, we walked up on a few of them. We were pretty much the only people there. I mean, Kopan, you're always going to have folks. But Ximshe, Takalika Bosch, Pasqualabach, for a while, I mean, we had these places to ourselves, and we always enjoy that. And in fact, one of our things is try to be the first one in. You know, we try to stay as close as we can to the entrance to any site that we're going to want to go see, and we're there before they open, and we want to run in and get in there before the hordes come. And unfortunately, I mean, they've only excavated, God, a minute percentage of what's out there at all these sites.
Wow.
And many of them, they haven't even begun to address it yet. I mean, again, with these LiDAR maps that are being produced, it's starting to kind of reach the point where there may have been little swathes of greenbelt, but all of Mesoamerica was tied together by gigantic cities. And whether or not it was a singular gigantic city or ones that had different names, like, for example, Tikal, I mean, you've got these massive pyramids that tower above the roof line of the surrounding jungle. So obviously those were easy to find. It's all those little habitations and those little ceremonial places and the steam baths that litter that jungle that they haven't even began to touch yet. If I'm not mistaken, I think Tikal is considered, the downtown is considered 222 square miles, and they've excavated a fraction of a percentage. It's just, they excavated the big stuff because it was obvious. The rest of it's still hidden in jungle.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then you've got El Mirador, you've got Calakmul, you've got these huge, enormous sites that they've just begun to tear into, but they don't have the funding and the resources to get there in a hurry.
Yeah, and the really sad thing is that who is getting there first are these hunters. These guys are coming in with Cat 450s and equipment, and their intention is to steal as much as they can before any kind of authority or college or whomsoever shows up and hawk all that stuff on the black market. Drug dealers got to spend their money somewhere.
Dave, you just mentioned Tikal, and on your website, you have a lot of photos of the towering pyramid there, and that's another one, another site that really intrigues me. Are there any dimensions or similarities to the Giza pyramids that would show some kind of worldwide pyramid building going on contemporaneously?
Based on Tikal, I would say no, because Tikal is very different, and that was one of those the structures there are far taller. They're far skinnier. And they've got these big mask type tops. They're very different than any of the other sites that I've seen. You go to Chichen Itza, you go to Coba, you can, and non-Maya, but Teotihuacan for sure, and you'll see very kind of your standard idea of what a pyramid should look like because of ancient Egypt.
Right.
And there are definite similarities in other Maya sites, for sure. But at Tikal, I'm not sure. Rob, you might have chime in if you've got anything I don't, but I haven't come across anything, and they are differently shaped.
Yeah, the Egyptian pyramids are at 63-degree angles, and it's out of the Russian Federation. Some of their science is a bit unusual, but there is conclusive science that a 63-degree angle pyramid with a certain base size aligned on magnetic north will prevent mold and, blade sharpen and all of this sort of esoteric stuff. As far as the pyramids, the Maya pyramids go, even from site to site, they look different. I mean, they're all pretty much in Egypt.
They do.
They're sort of constructed the same. It's important to bear in mind that as far as the Maya were concerned, with all these structures, it wasn't about creating an interior space. There may have actually been burials in many of these Maya pyramids, unlike what you encounter in Egypt, contrary to popular belief.
Right.
It was about creating a space, a theatrical space, because the Maya were big on performance. Dancing.
Yep.
The shaman doing his curly routine and the whole shtick. And so it was
the ball games.
Exactly. It was a background for that. It wasn't necessarily to create a space that somebody could occupy inside. Those usually occurred away from those ceremonial plazas in a completely different area. So as far as it's weird because there are pyramids on all the continents, to the best of my understanding, except the ones under ice presently. So, they occur in China, and China is presently planting trees around. They're dumping dirt and planting trees around their pyramids, disguising from space because they don't want to be associated. Yeah, they want to hide it. They occur everywhere. It's just like the dolmens in Europe. They occur everywhere, even here in America. As Barbara well knows, over on the East Coast, they're everywhere. So the thread of thought of something being tasked, whatever it was, or what the motivation was, that's all unknown. That's one of the things that we find the most intriguing. It's like, stand back and look at that thing and go, wow, what were they thinking? What was the thought? This would have taken thousands of people 15, 20 years to build. What was the big deal?
Yeah. Well, but then you do have a distinct similarity in God structures and systems. That's what's intrigued me the most is you've got, grain gods in all these ancient cultures they're all the same. Yep. Osiris repeats himself several times. Osiris to the Maya is Hun-Hunappu. Yep. Osiris to the Hopi is Masao. He just keeps popping up. It's the same guy. It's the same Orion thing. It's bizarre. So how does that get past thousands of years ago, when people can't cross the seas?
Yeah. And by the way, Dave, I learned recently, when you sight down through the arch there in Santa Catalina and Antigua and you're looking at what we call Mount Agua, the Maya called it Hunappu.
Nice.
The first, yeah.
Yep. Dave, you were just talking about these expansive cities, and Rob just mentioned Mount Agua. Out on the perimeter of a lot of these sites, you gave us the visualization of the jungles, or just beyond the ruins. But with that many people living in these cities, or just in the area, to be able to come to the festivals and participate in the activities at the plazas, people have to eat. Just to tie in maybe something from Joan Conover's show 2-3 weeks ago with us, was there evidence of canals that have been discovered yet, or is it some kind of irrigation ditches that.
Oh, they weren't ditches. They were well engineered. They were basically tile lined with stones. We just saw some last week at Taco Kabosh. I mean,
and they still work.
Their organization for agriculture was on a scale probably, more important than like the FDA here in the 60s. Or let's say back in the 40s. I mean, they knew what needed to happen, and the people got together and achieved that end so that everyone could be taken care of and fed.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And again, that's not
very organized, very good engineering.
Yeah, outstanding engineering. And it's not just the Maya in South America. We have the same thing here in this country. I mean, I've seen them I've seen canals Easter canals in Louisiana. They speculate that there's some in Florida. I never know how to pronounce them correctly, but the Hohokam or the Hohokam.
I've heard it both ways.
Yeah, they had extensive canals in New Mexico, long before the Europeans ever arrived.
And Arizona. Thank you very much.
Yes. Oh, you're identifying with being an Arizonian now, huh?
I am. As a matter of fact, there is a Hohokam site right next to the airport in Phoenix. It's ridiculously close. So if you're early for a flight, Well, Snaketown's in Casa Grande. This is God, I can't remember what they call it, but it's right next to the airport in Phoenix. Go see it. It's a good one.
So was it preserved intentionally when they leveled the place for the airport?
It's just off to the. I believe it was. It got lucky. It was left.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. They built the airport off to the east of it.
Interesting. Yeah, Mark, I'm sure you've heard us rant before. We always go back to William Denevan, who was professor emeritus at University of Wisconsin, and he wrote this book about the pre-Columbian population of indigenous peoples in the Americas. And in that book, when he first published that book the first time around, I think in the 60s or early 70s, he spoke about the canals that he had encountered. This is long before LIDAR. This is simply going out and walking around with a tape measure in, it was either Peru or Bolivia, but anyway, somewhere in South America. And as a result of the terracing and the irrigation, the well-engineered irrigation and the amount of people it would have taken to construct that and then feed, he puts the pre-Columbian population of the Americas at 50 million people. Not a half a dozen scrambling around in loincloths with a basket on their head. This is a well thought out society.
Since I'm one of probably a lot of the large number of people in the audience. I've never been there. I've just seen photos, but I would have never guessed that the population was at that 50 million people. 1,000, 2,000 years ago. I wouldn't have imagined it was that large. So, it sounds like we're talking about an empire that was far more vast than we realize today.
Well, from what it sounds like.
Go ahead, Dave.
It doesn't really. It does. I was just going to add that it just doesn't sound like it was a quote empire. It sounds like there were many different groups of people living in harmony in different areas all over North, Central, and South America. At least that's how it comes across. And of course, that's before the Catholics came over and had fun with everybody, and the English decided that Manifest Destiny was going to rape the U.S. Anyway, we won't get into that. But
no, we're being good tonight.
Right. There were a lot of people here, and what does that say for those systems and what happened when they got here? Yeah, that's a lot of people whacked for no good reason, and isn't that good timing for Thanksgiving?
Oh.
I know. I'm going to rain on Thanksgiving.
We're indigenous people are referring to Thanksgiving as National Mourning Day now.
I like that. I'll go along with that.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, you haul people in for dinner and then go out and kill their women and children while they're eating. That's a great thing to celebrate every year. But nobody knows that, do they? Nobody even knows the true history of Thanksgiving.
Yep.
That's
by
how
the way,
ignorant we are.
When you said it was different groups of people living in harmony, I mean, the trade routes that you and I have, we didn't discover them by any means, but just the research that we've done of how far some of these people walk carrying certain goods. Well, besides the fact there's an accord between point A and point B, you can't get to point A to point B if it's a bunch of thugs between you and them. So, without doubt, I mean, the sacrificial system that the Maya and the Aztecs and even the Toltecs may have been involved in, I think it's hard to understand. We can't possibly get our heads around it, but it was safer then than it is now because those guys, let's say 1,600 miles from Central America to the Southwest, like for the macaw sash that was carried, the birds that were physically carried, that's a long trip. That doesn't happen just overnight. So everybody must have been kind of getting along.
Well, and the other thing is Richard Thornton. The book that he turned us on to, the firsthand account of I want to say he was Dutch, a Dutch guy who walked through the southeast United States in the late 1400s. Actually not late, 1460s, 1470s maybe. God, I wish I could remember the title of that. Anyway, great read. And this guy's talking about walking up on people speaking Hebrew tongues, Muslim-speaking blacks. Okay, now he's going through villages. He actually came up on a village in North Georgia called Copal. Copal comes from Guatemala. Right. We just brought them back. But, I mean, that doesn't happen by accident. And obviously those communities were close enough that he could walk through them, and everybody seemed to be getting along pretty decently. I'm sure there was a scuffle here and there, but...
Okay, Dave, you just mentioned Richard Thornton's research. He's been a guest with us, and he's talking about the trade routes and this would be a good time to just to give an example. And Rob brought up the scarlet macaws that are found in Arizona. Rob, can you tell us a little bit about what's the story behind the macaws in Arizona? They're not indigenous.
No, they're not indigenous. We don't encounter those big parrot-type birds. Scarlet macaw is a parrot. And by the way, we saw scads of them, dozens of them at Copan, which is amazing to see such a resplendent animal in its natural environment, much less have a bunch of them buzz you as a group. It's like yet another reason to visit that part of the world. But scarlet macaws, we know, were employed by the Maya or their feathers were employed by the Maya in their costuming. The priests wore them, the royalty wore them. And for some odd reason, way up in the Southwest, about 1,600 miles away, they were also being raised at Chaco Canyon, which we won't go into Chaco Canyon at the moment because we're supposed to avoid the Hopi, so fine and dandy. But the upshot of the thing is that those types of birds really impress themselves upon their owners or the person that they perceive as taking care of them. And if you don't care for them, they die very quickly. They start to lose their feathers. They get not viruses. I can't even think of the word I'm looking for, but they get diseases, and they die quite quickly if they're separated from the person that they're accustomed to being around, which means, sure, there was a trade route. And sure, there were scarlet macaws being kept and raised in the Southwest of America that obviously came through Mexico or Guatemala or Belize or wherever, which means the Maya carried them and stayed with them. They stayed where they brought those birds and cared for them, which means when all these archaeologists go, oh, the Maya were never in America, well, you've got evidence right there. The Edge of Cedar State Park in Utah has a macaw sash that's 1,000 years old. It was made here in the States from a bird that was transported from all the way down in Mesoamerica. That means somebody carried it, that it was buddies with. But they want to deny that the Maya were ever in America, and it's abundantly obvious, and that's a perfect example of how information is right there if you're willing to take the time and look for it, and then call, I'll say, nonsense on current academia.
Yep. Yeah, and I'll give you another one, cacao.
Okay.
Another, they found cacao beans up here, and they found 166 cylinder vessels under Chaco Canyon, under Pueblo Bonito, that were used to drink cacao, a cacao beverage, which the Maya royalty drank. Doesn't grow up here. I mean, it's kind of pretty simple math when you come across these things. It's just crazy that it's just not getting passed.
Well, and the funny thing in that instance, I think, we were together in Chaco. I can't remember how many years ago, but the lady who'd done that research did a lecture about finding the residue of the cacao bean beverage in these vessels outside at night. It was awesome. It was like 9 o'clock at night. It's still light out.
That was cool.
That was very cool. That's yet another example, much like this William Denevan thing, the guy that we were talking about from Wisconsin a few minutes ago. There is research that is so accepted by academia that they can't refute it. They don't even want to take it on and argue with it. But the truth of the matter is, they never talk about it intentionally because it's contrary to them getting their next 4-year grant at whatever college they're working for.
Yeah.
Your only hope if you want to learn something is you got to go punk.
Right. And I mean, if you want to go on, Mark, if you want to go on beyond that in terms of connections, my God, there's more connections than there are non-connections. I mean, Richard's story of tracking his people, the Creek, where did they come from? How did they end up in North Georgia? He finds that there were 4 migrations, 2 by land and 2 by sea in ancient times, from the lands where the Maya were and from the area, an area down in East Peru. I mean, come on.
Yeah, and
right
they sailed across the Gulf of Mexico and brought the Mayan blue dyes.
Right. And named the town Copal, and did a whole lot of things and built structure and terraced. There's terraced agriculture up there. I mean, it's right in front of everybody. I mean, Cahokia. Good Lord, come on, those are pyramids. I mean, the Maya that escaped Maya land were not the royalty. They didn't want to escape. The people who escaped were the people like the Eagle clan of the Hopi, who talk about getting involved in ritual sacrifice and learning that was a bad thing and bailing. And Richard's saying the same thing, that the Creek, his people, man, his stories are about, God, they have ritual human sacrifice. This ain't right. We got to get out of here. So they bailed. Well, there you go. And it's not a long trip, especially if you hug the coast. And with all the people who, are poo-pooing the sea travel thing, Jesus, I mean, the Maya are a seafaring people.
Yep. As a matter of fact, go ahead, Dave.
No, after you.
I was going to offer the very northernmost part of the islands off the coast of Belize, Ambergris Caye and all those places that have become huge tourist attractions. There's a really convenient place for people to bring large ships between those islands to the mainland. And as diving has become more popular in the last few years, they've realized that it really looks like it was man-made. It was excavated for larger ships. Fine and dandy, whatever. Some divers were down there back in the late 70s, and they found these massive stones, like huge boulders, that had this incised sort of circle in the middle as though they had been carved to be hasped to something. And then they looked at their location of these 2 objects within the body of this area that they initially thought had been dredged or excavated, and they realized not only did they excavate it, they put a bridge up. They put a toll bridge up. These were the weights that swung the thing open in and out so people could access it. But no, the Maya couldn't cross an ocean. They couldn't even make it to Florida.
No, of course not. That's ridiculous. I mean, the same thing's going on with the same, you can take down the Beringia theory the same way. I mean, you've talked about Kennewick, man. We've brought that up several times.
Right.
There's the Kelp Highway is totally viable.
Oh,
and if you're down in South America, why couldn't you hug the coast all the way north? It's ridiculous to think you couldn't do that. Even if you can't wrap your head around the fact that they can't cross the sea, or they could rather, you could probably wrap it around that.
Yeah, I mean, as far as we've done this before, but for those of us who've not heard us speak before, as far as Kennewick Man goes, expired individual found during a hydroplane race on the Columbia River back in, I think, the 70s. Turns out that he was 92 to 9,400 years old. He had been ritually. Oh, that's lovely. It's like a Who concert. And I sit in line all day for tickets for that. So, so the upshot of the thing is these guys were at a big outdoor event, a 3-day event. They find the remains of this individual, and so they, of course, call the authorities, who then realize that this isn't like a recent murder or something. This guy's been in the ground for years. And the upshot of the thing is Doug Owsley, who is considered the expert on skull history at the Smithsonian, looked at the skull and went, "Oh, this is obviously Polynesian." Well, since Doug looked at it, they then had other people, a gentleman from Copenhagen, whose name I couldn't pronounce if I had to, did DNA research on it and realized that the guy was quite literally from the northernmost islands of Japan, which makes him of the Ainu. The Ainu people are an indigenous folk who occupy the northernmost island of Japan. And looking at where he lived and all these spots he could have hopped to along that coastline, pretty easy for him to end up in the Columbia River after only a couple of months. Further DNA research clearly indicated the guy lived off a diet of sea life. He ate seals, he ate clams, and he found himself in the inland of Washington almost 10,000 years ago. It's not hard to build a boat, folks.
No, it isn't.
Rob, you just mentioned Polynesian cultures. This show we have coming up right after Christmas, we're getting into some Asian cultures. Their language seems to survive in the ancient Ecuadorian language. What you're saying is backed up by the Kennewick Man as well as the Samoan language being found in Ecuador. There's linguistic proof. It's all there in front of us, like you said earlier. I don't know how we can continue doing the denial that ancient people didn't know how to build ships.
Oh, sure. It's easy. You just, like Dave spoke about earlier, every class that comes into your classroom every year, you keep lying to them. I mean, At this point, it's got to be really difficult, at least in my mind or my impression, for these academic professionals to not have at least some kind of peripheral kind of research going on in the back of their head, but they still feel that what was first expounded in the latter part of the 19th century by the National Geographic guys from Europe that were going around the world gathering information, that's what they have to teach. So it's easy. So that's how that happens. As far as linguistics go, I lived in Hawaii for years, and I had many conversations with both indigenous people and like rangers who were researchers. And part of my history is Nisqually. I'm Northwest Coast Salish, and much of our language is predicated on Polynesian. The totem building, Polynesian. The way we build canoes, Polynesian. Captain Cook arrives there in 1776. He tries to take off. He kind of blows the whole thing, comes back. That's a long story, but he ended up dead. The upshot of the thing is Captain Cook was actually a pretty cool guy.
He was.
Yeah, he really was. He understood even back in, almost 300 years ago, 250 years ago, that his physical presence and his crew's presence in these, at that time, unknown places was going to affect the natives, and he felt somewhat responsible for that, which clearly shows that he was a conscientious individual. But one thing he always did was like every place they stopped, does anybody want to come with us? We're exploring the world. Come with us. When he arrived at Kealakekua Bay on the Big Island of Hawaii and explained to the indigenous people living there, here's where I'm going. Anybody want to come? Only 2 guys said, yeah. And he's like, well, why only 2 people? They're like, because everybody else has already been there. We know the way. We go back and forth all the time. Kealakekua, Big Island, west side. Pacific Northwest, east side of the island, 2,200 miles away. They were making that journey with regularity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
One of many. And if you look at, by the way, if you look at some Maya sites too, and some of the artwork, I'll bring up Ekbalam. That Ekbalam blew my mind, and very few people go to Ekbalam. I don't know why, because I keep going back to that because of the faces that were carved there, and the artwork, the Egyptian mudras that are scribed inside of a wall up in the jaguar mouth at the top of the thing. It's just stunning. I mean, you look at one face and you're like, okay, that looks Caucasian. You look at another one, well, that looks distinctly Polynesian. You look at another one, well, that looks African. How do they know what these different peoples look like? And there are distinctly different representations there.
Yeah, and it's not just
Polynesian.
It's
one of them.
Yeah. I spoke over the top of you, Dave, but it's not just skin tones. Like, well, I don't know if we had this conversation. I think Mark and I did earlier, so I can touch on it in a while. But it's like it's physiology. It's like cultural things, like with the Maya, that boarding of the head when they're young, so that the nose protrudes because they found that attractive. I mean, all that's represented there at Ekbalam in these different. It's not even a panel. It's just like one big, really out of place hieroglyph, I guess I'd call it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a hieroglyph. I mean, what would you call that thing?
It is the jaguar mouth?
No, that
God, well,
right of the jaguar mouth where you have all those different people represented in color.
Well, it's around it's up above it. It's above it. It's down below. Oh, you mean on the interior, the inside of the wall there, the little Egyptian-looking figures?
Yeah,
those were crazy.
The mudras. Yes.
Those were crazy. Yeah, I mean, and those were one of the last things we noticed. We're looking at the stone, and all of a sudden I look to the inside of the wall, and we look together. We're like, what the hell are those doing there?
Yeah.
And I took, no, you could only get so close, but they were in full color. They were drawn in color on the side of this plastered entrance inside the jaguar mouth. You could only get so close, but I took a picture and blew it up, and I'll be damned if they don't look like Egyptians sitting down in a certain mudra, like a teacher leading a class.
Yes, that was my impression as well. I sent some pictures to Mark earlier. I don't know whatever happened to them, but it's not important because I can speak to them without folks actually seeing them. But there's a great museum, the BC Royal Museum in Victoria, Canada, that has a floor dedicated every year to a specific, peoples around the world or whatever. They've done a Viking thing. Last year was Egyptian. This most recent year was a Maya exhibit, and the vast majority of things exhibited there came from the Patan area, the northern eastern part of Guatemala. And Ushactun, which is a city there was some leader, some king in the past, and he passed on, and within his funerary objects were 12 representations of individuals who probably served him in his life, a scribe, a ball player. You get the picture.
That makes sense, yeah. Okay.
That makes sense. So within the body of that exhibit, they place these two figures together. One is quite tall, and he has a fairer skin. His forehead was obviously boarded as a child, so he gets that really prominent sort of nose. And next to him is a shorter, very round, black figure with obviously African attributes. This thing was buried, these two objects were buried 1,300 years ago. I mean, artists really weren't open to Picasso interpretations back then. It was literally representational art, It's not like I'm going to put all his eyes on one side of his face. They just didn't do that then. You got one guy who's obviously from one place right next to another guy who's obviously from another part of the world, but that never happened even when you're looking at those two objects together. Come on.
Well, remember what our friend from the university told us when we brought up the Olmec head.
You got to walk around
those aren't African
from all sides. Yeah.
Yeah, those aren't African. You're just looking at it from the front. You need to look at it from the side. Now, granted, they are 3D, so you do need to walk around them and look at the whole thing. But it still looks African.
Well, that's true, but in that regard, and I'm not defending him in any respect, but in that regard, he was referring specifically to the features. In this instance, these are ceramic, what I'm referring to at Ushakun are ceramic icons that were made by somebody who saw these individuals and saw the differentiation between those two. And it's not just size and scale and appearance, it's color as well.
Well, there we go.
And Ushakun, I think, would have been about, they were definitely late classic when they went down the tubes, but I think that was about 732. So that's about 200 years before a lot of the other, late classic period cities started to fail. They failed sooner than a lot of the others.
Yeah, Rob, when you visited the Mayan display that was on in the Canadian Museum for the summer. I have thought about some of the reports that maybe you've remember seeing from Jason Gerald's work with you two, where one of the skulls from the Kanawha Valley mounds look Peruvian. Brian Forrester, and you've worked with Marcia Moore a lot too. Hi, Marcia. Get the archive to you tomorrow. She's worked really closely with Brian Forrester, and he's been all over Ancient Aliens with the really elongated skulls. Did this Canadian exhibit have any information like that on these unusual skulls, or did you see them on your trips? I find that to be a fascinating subject.
Well, it is fascinating, but as far as the Maya specifically go, they practiced this form of boarding their kids. When the kids were young and their skulls were not well formed, they would place an object, and here's what's interesting. In the cultures where you encounter this, it's limited to royalty. You don't do it with the poor kids, but the royal women would take their children and place an object on their forehead right above the bridge of their nose, and then bind it behind their neck so that their skull grew in an odd formation. Now, as far as the Maya are concerned, and this may be true in other cultures that I'm not as conversant with, anomalies, be they physiological or be they even psychological or developmental, were considered sacred. So a guy that had one arm shorter than another, had special value. A dwarf person would also have special value within the body of the Maya. But as far as the elongated skulls, they intentionally elongated them. Why? Well, at some point in history, there was a culture that found that attractive, which we could probably, spend the rest of our lives trying to explore where that first occurred and what it was most important. Why it was important to these folks. But as far as the Canada exhibit goes, no, they did not discuss that. But on the northernmost part of Vancouver Island, Marcia has personally seen the remains of an individual named Lucy Moon, who was one of the last lines of royalty of whatever tribe it was that she was associated with, and she did indeed have an elongated skull. That's a whole different subject. So the next time she's on, work her over about it.
Yeah, and at some point, Mark, it could be. Yeah, I tend to think that these peoples had contact and or received knowledge from the same beings. it's too much. There's only a few ways that can happen. I suppose the collective unconscious is another, but that's a tall order when it comes to spanning the globe and with all these practices down to the burials. You mentioned Jason Gerald, the giant burials under the mounds in the United States. Okay, you've got a giant 6 feet under. You've got his crew ritually sacrificed and buried above him, around under a wooden frame, under a dirt mound. You see the exact same thing in the UK. How does that happen at a time when people can't cross the seas? When it comes to the Maya and the elongated skulls, maybe they learned that from Egypt. They've got a similar god system. They've got the grain god. The Hopi. Sorry to bring up the Hopi again. They were directed to travel the whole earth in all directions and meet at the center place. And you've got over 40 different clans that somehow found their way to northern Arizona at a time without cell phones, maps, or anything like that, at different times with different oral traditions from different places. That's kind of fascinating. And they, too, have an Osiris grain god. They didn't get into the skull deformation, but, maybe they carried some other things. It's just, the Dogon. The Dogon were in Egypt. What if the Dogon were among, or the ancient Dogon were among the Olmecs who came over and passed that to the Maya? There's so many possibilities. It's just fascinating to me. And the Dogon and the Hopi have quite a deep connection for some odd reason. Go figure.
But one connection would be, very astute astronomy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I think Barbara's going to be covering that on a upcoming show soon. But we'll talk about that later. Just what the listeners' appetites for what we have in the works. But it is, Rob, did you see any more evidence, possible cranial deformation? Could that be evidence of migrations from other planets or solar systems? Giorgio says his lapel pin of the airplane was found in next to buried underneath some Mesoamerican pyramid. Was there things on display at the Canadian Museum, or just there in the jungles that would make it someone think that here we have evidence of aliens?
Well, first of all, I'd be intrigued how Giorgio ever managed to excavate underneath a pyramid. That would require hundreds of people and a huge budget to find said airplane. But
I think that's where it was supposedly came from. It's based on some artifact from there, I think. I thought that's what he said on. But go ahead.
The reference to airplanes that I can equate is south of the Paracas people. There were Peruvians that made these little gold ornaments that are kept in a museum in Costa Rica underground. You have to get through security and go down through a secure elevator down to view these things. And a lot of people thought they were flying craft, airplanes of some kind. It turns out what they were doing was venerating the bee god, which the Maya also did. So maybe there's a bit of a connection there. Now, as far as the Paracas thing goes, that culture was they were kind of about the same time as the Maya, and there may have been, again, Maya people moving obviously to the north, but why wouldn't they go to the south as well? So they may have found said appearance attractive, incorporated it, and then as they moved to the southwest, there may have been a northwest to southwest connection. We don't know. But I do know that as far as the northwest goes, we did not do cranial deformation. But you go farther north up to the very tip of Vancouver Island, which is about 160, 180 miles from here, it is evident.
Okay. I would offer that pretty much every ancient culture, attributed their knowledge to beings from the sky.
Yep.
To star beings. So,
yep.
if you want to go out on, so, if you want to go on an alien kick and do that, that's great. My problem with that whole thing is that you're not talking enough about the people in the oral tradition and diving into it on that level. But, maybe that's just to sell the show. Who knows? But there's obviously something going on. Everybody reveres star beings. The Kachina culture. Supposedly I saw one. The Dogon have a Kachina culture. Who knows? I don't know. I'm open-minded. Lay it on me. I'll buy it.
Well, you got to think, even as far as the Maya go, they felt that the ball court represented Xibalba, and once you had your 9 layers above and your 13 below, every time the game was played, they were opening that portal to Xibalba. Well, Xibalba was the portal itself once you were down there back to the Milky Way, which they called the Sac Bay, the White Way. Well, they constructed roads consistently, 3 feet high, 20 feet wide, painted white. Yep. They called it the Sac Bay, the way back to where you came from.
Which were flattened using a what? A wheel. Which
but they didn't have the wheel, did they? No. Every Maya researcher says they didn't have the wheel. Yeah, they did.
Sure they did. They just used it for ceremonial purposes. It was a special thing.
Only in that instance, they would incorporate wheels in toys made for kids because that's part of oral tradition that you can have your hands on. They could hand it to some child and explain to them, this is a sacred object. This is what it represents. It's part of your way back home. Don't use it for anything else.
Yep.
Dave and Rob, for someone like me who is interested, the Tikal photos on your website and other ones I've seen of that pyramid just really fascinate me. It would be nice to go down there. What is how's the safety for groups of people who would like to visit a place like that?
You hear it? No, this is. I'm so glad you asked. This is something that we're both adamant about. Never once did we feel our safety in question whatsoever. We're smart to begin with. We travel a lot, so it comes down to being a smart human being. There are areas of Detroit, L.A., Seattle, I don't care, name the city in the U.S. that I would never want to walk into.
Right.
If you've got your wits about you and you're not a stupid drunk American running around just trying to get drunk in a different town, off a few less bucks, you're going to be fine.
Although we've done that.
Yeah, although we have done that. Yeah, we've played both ways. But it's so safe that the U.S. State Department, I've got a real thing in my craw with the U.S. State Department. They've had Guatemala on the most dangerous places to visit list for, what did Jose tell us, 10 years, 15 years?
Something
Honduras,
like that.
Same thing.
It's just not to cut you off, but I mean, as far as Guatemala goes, it's the only place on the planet I have ever been where folks don't look down at the sidewalk. They don't look down at the ground.
No.
If a stranger comes by, they engage you, and everybody, depending on the time of day, buenos dias, buenas tardes, whatever, be polite to people. When you and I were just at Chi-Chi like a week ago, I spotted these 4 college students, and we made eye contact at the same time. I think you were a bit in front of me and didn't notice, but they were obviously learning English, and they spotted an American, and they were like, "Hey, nice to see you. How are you doing? Where are you from?" Just everybody there is so polite. It's insane. It becomes kind of unusual after a while because we don't encounter that here.
No, and you see smiles everywhere. And the problem with traveling down there is you got to come home. We both get to the Miami airport to get our connections, and within 10 minutes of being in that airport, walking around pissy people with pissy attitudes, it's like, God, can I please go back? You know, great volcanic soil, all this fresh produce, some of the best food you're ever going to get. The people were wonderful though. The people were the highlight for sure.
Yep. Always are. Yeah, and the thing that's unusual as far as those that are in an academic environment, again, and they want to quote the number of people that are living below the poverty level. They're quite literally referring to folks that we encountered. There's quite a lot of them as you leave Shela or Quetzaltenango and you're driving through the mountains towards Toccoa-Caboche. I mean, it's just abundant farms everywhere. And these are subsistence farmers. They grow enough to feed their own families. They trade the rest, sell the rest. If you were to isolate any one of those individuals and say, hey, look, you know, if you go to school for 6 months, you can be a waiter in Antigua. If you go to school for 4 years, you can do this or you can do that. They'd be like, look, dude, I got it made. I've got it made. I'm with my family. I'm happy. I work with the land every day. Well, those folks show up on those polls as being disenfranchised, but they're not. They're the richest people in the world.
They are, in many respects. History, culture, I mean, everything down there. The artistry is amazing. I mean, there are Maya women. You can go to this little village on Lake Adatlan that we hit, Santa Catalina Palopo. And, and you can see there's Maya women in cooperatives that are weaving, and they'll spend 2 weeks making a table runner. 2 weeks making a table runner that you can pick up down there for what, $20 bucks?
20, 30, $40 bucks. And that's
they live
in living for them. They feel comfortable with that because they have created something. That's like the old artistic thing that got lost in the 1940s. You know, when American culture, artistic culture, moved over to Europe. You know, it's like, I've made this. I am offering this to you. It may enrich your life in some way. Would you like to have it? And then you reward them for their effort.
Right. And they live in what, by our standards, and by our, I don't mean mine, I mean our society. By our standards in Western culture up here in the United States, they live in what we would consider, a lot of them, squalor. And it's not. They're happier than we are. They've got everything they need. They don't need any more. They don't want any more. God, why would you? You don't need a Cadillac.
Seriously, Dave, when was the last time you walked through any town in America, let's say 8 in the morning, 7 in the morning, you know, it's early, the sun's coming up, and everybody is outside cleaning, sweeping the sidewalk, scrubbing the sidewalk on their hands and knees. It doesn't happen here. Nobody cares. Down there, granted, yes, people from the West, like you said, they refer to it as squalor, but they're so well organized, and they're so conservative in their belief system that it's important to make an impression on others.
And the pride, just the pride in whatever you have, damn it, it's going to be clean. I'm going to take care of it. God, I saw that everywhere down there. Like Rob said, first thing in the morning, everybody's out sweeping. Why? Well, because it's dirty. Sweep it.
There was even an instance, I don't know if you recall, we went over to Las Sepulturas. Las Sepulturas could be considered a separate ruined site, but there was
I forgot about that one.
Like we just talked about. There was a sack bay between Copan, Honduras, and Las Sepulturas, which was considered to be kind of a residential area, but it was for not necessarily the elite, but again, the scribes, the priests, the artisans. And I've been there before. Probably been 10 years since I'd been there, and it was the same caretaker keeping an eye on the place, and his wife was outside sweeping leaves off the jungle floor into a pile.
Using a broom made out of a branch.
Yes, because it wasn't organized. We must be organized.
Yeah.
Unreal.
Just awesome, man. And it hurts me that, you know, we did learn while we were down there that tourism to Guatemala has dropped 40% in the last year.
Yeah.
That's dramatic. And I'm not, you know, we're not getting paid to pump up Guatemala, you know, as a commercial or anything, but my God, get your butt down there. What a wonderful place. Go to the Highlands. Go to Shela.
What's the food like? You said just quickly mentioned fresh fruits, which that sounds great. But are there like a lot of burrito type meals?
Nope.
Like, I'm not familiar with it. What do they usually prepare if you go into a restaurant or stop at a cafe?
Tell you what, Dave, let me start this one and I'll let you finish. There was a place that we found in Quetzaltenango. Quetzaltenango is a Nahuatl expression for a place name, Tenango meaning place of, Quetzal being the national bird. So when the Spanish first arrived, after they'd encountered the Nahuatl and they moved from where Cortez started to conquer up in Mexico down to the south, tons of Quetzals, Quetzaltenango. The actual name of the place is Xela or Xelahu. Xela has what is considered probably one of the best indigenous restaurants in the entire country. Their menu is, when it's all broken down, you've really got like 4 main things, which are the signature Guatemalan dishes and then your sides. We ordered all 4 of them.
Signature Maya dishes.
Yes, signature Maya dishes. Yeah, that's important.
Yep.
So we ordered all 4 of them and split them up between us. I think, like 40 quetzales, 50 quetzales. We're talking, what, $4.50 to $6 for a complete meal. And in addition to the owner's daughter coming and explaining the history of the dishes to us and what the source of these materials are and where they were grown and how the whole thing works, upon exiting the place, the gentleman that was our waiter stood at the door, one hand behind the back, shook each one of our hands, and thanked us for coming in. That's what Guatemala is like. Amazing food, good, cheap, and the people are so kind and so accommodating that it's kind of hard to get your head around if you've grown up in this country.
Yeah, it is. It takes you back. It really does.
Yep.
It was amazing. You can't help but smile down there all the time.
Yep, you walk around with a big dumb grin. So, Mark, the dish down there is Pipián. And Pipián, if you make it really simple, it only has 22 spices. If you want to get complex, it has up to 30. But its signature flavors are roasted, smoked, pumpkin seeds, cacao. It has chocolate in it, and then all the finesse that's associated with that. So it kind of acts like a stew base, and then pork or chicken or something of that nature is served, inside of that stew base with rice on the side. I mean, $4 and you're
and
stuffed.
Beans.
Everything.
Oh yeah. Everything with black beans, but which posed its own challenges.
Yes.
From time to time, but the food was, my God, unreal. By and large, it was wonderful. The only exception I would put on the list is Gringo Tenango, Penahuachel on Lake Occidental. That's become it's become a little bit touristy, but you go to the small villages and you can still find some good stuff. Well, and in the city, like Rob just said, that Flor de Maya is what it's called. Awesome place.
Yep. Well, Maya.
One of many.
Yes. Well, and on the heels of that, since I am going to go out on a limb and basically do an advertisement, if one finds himself in Copanderinas, Honduras, there's a place called Lola's.
L-O-L-A, Lola's.
Lola's, where a nice elderly Maya lady pumps the bellows with her left foot to keep the fire stoked while she does these skewered meat dishes and vegetable dishes over the top of that thing. Oh, amazing. And cheap. So cheap.
So,
Pinchos.
So if someone would visit, like me, who has very little experience with the Spanish language other than being able to order at Taco Bell, what is there any do a lot of the locals speak enough English to get you through the situation, or are there like Spanish and English translations at the restaurants?
First of all, Mark, you will be pleased to know that there are Taco Bells in Guatemala.
At least one that we know of, yep. And it's
in Guatemala City. Yeah. No,
there's one in Taylor, too.
There is one in Sheldon. That's right. Yes, and unfortunately, the Golden Arches make their appearance down there as well, but few and far between. For the most part, people are willing to help you in any way they can. But there is limited English when you get into some of these places. They'll work with you.
I was going to offer that as far as the limited English goes, you got to remember that these people feel conquered by Spanish. There are some villages that you go to that still speak their dialect of Mayan, and they've never learned English they've never learned Spanish even. Even having some exchanges with people, there was an art gallery that we went into that we got some stuff from, and they would speak to us in Spanish. But when the family was speaking together, they were speaking in Quiche or Quechuquel. I can't tell the difference because they're so similar sometimes trying to listen to them. But the important thing is, like any country, as long as you're not in like Italy or France, they appreciate the fact that you're simply attempting to speak their language. And the beauty of the thing is in Guatemala, especially around Antigua, Guatemala City, it is the clearest form of Central American Spanish. There's no slang. There's really no, for lack of a better expression, like in the South, there's no twang to it. They speak very clear, very methodical, very slow Spanish. Yes. So it's pretty easy to quickly figure out what it is that they're saying, and if nothing else, they'll help you because that's what people there are like.
Yeah, they're not put off. They think it's fun. You're trying. They're going to help you.
Okay.
But if you hit Antigua for sure. There's more English speaking there than anywhere because there's a bunch of English-Spanish schools there. It's a haven for. Actually, Sheila's become like that, from what Jose was telling us.
Yep.
Yeah, that there are a lot of English-Spanish speaking immersion schools where you go and spend a few weeks, month or two, whatever, to live in and learn the language, which I would love to do. My Spanish has deteriorated since we traveled last, but it got a little bit of a brushing up. But I need some work.
Yeah, as we've said, both Antigua and Sheila, there are a number of Spanish schools, and there's quite a lot of expatriates or even college students, whatever, that go there. And if you want to do like a complete immersion where you live with the Maya family, you get 3 meals a day, and you probably spend 4 to 6 hours a day with a private tutor, you might be out about $15, $20 a day. I mean, come on,
Yeah, I know.
It's the way our economy works compared to the way their economy works is so contrary.
The total cultural immersion is supposedly the best way to learn the language, and what you're presenting to the listeners doesn't make it sound like it's a intimidating experience to go there. Just sounds like it would be a fascinating experience.
Well, there were
wonderful.
Go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, just being there, I could not recommend Antigua more to anyone. If you've never been down there, I'd start there. Just walk Antigua. The whole city is a UNESCO heritage site. Cobblestone streets, English speakers everywhere. It's an easy place to get started. And Sheila would be number 2. I had never been there before this trip, and I fell in love with that city. It's the second biggest city in Guatemala. There's 1.5 million people there, and you'd never know it. It's incredible.
Wow. I didn't realize the city was that large. Okay,
so that's number 2, and number 1 is Guatemala City with 3.5. So,
wow,
there's just not a lot of people. There's a lot of beautiful country. It's dramatic. It's gorgeous. The food's incredible. The people are incredible. The art's incredible. I don't know why the U.S. State Department has them on a dangerous list because I swear, I mean, we didn't hop around Guatemala City. We weren't in Zone 8 very long. There's just areas you avoid. Get out into the nice areas and just hang out with the people. Yeah.
Well, Dave, I think probably the reason that the State Department still wants to identify Guatemala as dangerous goes back to the Reagan era. Montrios, remember him, the dictator at the time who was buddies with Reagan. I think it's kind of the State Department of this country kind of hiding their face. That whole, Japanese don't lose faith thing. Well, if we let people go down there and they suddenly realize how kind these people were when we spent all those years trying to convince them that they were leftist communist guerrillas, which is absolute nonsense. Yeah. They were simply indigenous people trying to defend the rights to their own land, take care of their own families, and the Reagan era dumped millions of dollars into Rios's program of disappearance.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, well, all I can say is it's safe. Just go. And if anybody has any questions, if you want to go and you have any questions, go to our website, get our emails, and shoot us a line. We'll be happy to help you.
Yeah. Tell you where to stay, who to get us a driver, all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
Okay. So, we had a nice summary of the Guatemalan culture. We have some other places to do a virtual visit in the last, about 20 minutes or so of the show. But if people go to, roadtoruins.com and watch some of your other videos and read some of your blogs, you also did an extensive trip to England and Ireland. You got a personal tour of Stonehenge and Avebury with Maria Wheatley and Hugh Newman. They're friends of ours, regular guests on the show. How was that experience? And you went over to Newgrange with James Swagger. What?
It was awesome. It was a great trip, but we were, self-acknowledged that, we were trying to bite off a lot at the time, and we're sitting on 35 to 36 hours of interview footage alone that we have not edited, not only from that trip, but from our trip across the U.S. And we've got a lot of work to do. We've had some personal challenges that have waylaid us both in the last few years and kind of taken us off track, but I think we're back on now. And we had a discussion about kind of reformatting Road to Ruins, doing it a little differently, and starting to dive into that footage and get it out there. It's still relevant. It's just a little dated. I'll look a little younger, which is probably good. But no, it was a great trip. We learned a lot on that trip, a ton on that trip. My God, it was like sight. It was really rampant. And I think we just need to dive back into that footage and pull something out, and we will. And we haven't decided exactly how we're going to go about funding it, but on our recent trip, a development arose that, may help us get to that direction. We've considered crowdfunding. We're looking at options right now and just kind of trying to figure out how to go forward. But I want to let everyone know that we will have new material up on that website soon. I'm working on a blog or two, and we've got a ton of stuff from our last trip we want to put up and post. So we're going to start getting it out.
Okay.
But Mark, as far as that trip goes, I think Dave, he kind of nailed it. It's like we've never really discussed it at length between us, but we bit off way too much. We intended to see everything, shoot everything, interview everyone in far too short of a period of time, and we did pull it off. But we both came back so burned out, only to encounter other life challenges that it's just like we just haven't touched it yet. We haven't done it.
Yeah, I had to. Between both of our health challenges and me trying to build a place to live, finally got that wrapped up, and that's nice. But, everything else has had to sit on the back burner. And this trip just, to me anyway, just lit a fire under my butt and said, God, this is what you need to be doing. You need to get back to it, and let's get rolling. So I don't want to speak for you, Rob, but I think we're on the same page.
Well, you'd like to think so, but,
Yeah, yes, I would.
No, I mean that there's again without beleaguering the point, there is something very rejuvenating about that part of the world. It's like, granted, I grew up with this massive fascination with Maya ruins, and I got to see 5 or 6 of them this last time. And Mark, there was even one, maybe 2. There was at least one instance where we hit a ruin, and it's called Ximche, and the Quechua people were there, and they were performing a ceremony, an ancient ceremony to bless. And this is my impression. I don't know exactly what they were doing, but I think what was happening is they were blessing a young couple who would probably would be married the week after we encountered the ceremony. They didn't care.
So cool.
I mean, they weren't uptight about us being physically present and observing for a bit and, walking away gracefully. That's just not something that you really encounter, here in the States anymore. It's like it's a part of history, and it's people that still relate to each other, and that makes you feel good when you walk away. It's good for your heart.
Sure does. And I got to use one of the words Rob taught me years ago, Kiiche Maya. Marios. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, and I'm just writing that down. Anyhow, on this trip to England, you did an experiment with a magnetometer that when Ross Hamilton was a guest with Barbara and Jeff Wilson spoke about it, I think this spring for the seed blessing ceremony. I think both of them spoke about the book Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty. So what was this experiment that you did on the West Kennet Longborough?
We took electromagnetic readings at the entrance, and we got up there at dawn when supposedly, according to Burke and Hallberg, who wrote Seed of Knowledge, Stone of Plenty, that's the time that those forces are most active, and you'll see more flux. And I'll be damned if we didn't see that firsthand. I'm walking around with the thing. It jumps up 50. It jumps down 50. It jumps up 50. It jumps down. And like I was saying, it was topping out around, I want to say 410 milligauss. It's just, it was fascinating to me to actually, you can read about that stuff, but actually getting the same instrument they used and taking it out to an ancient site and actually measuring it, that was pretty cool. And I'm pretty addicted to that thing now, and I know what to look for in photography, and that's one of the things I mentioned earlier, when I was looking at the land around me.
Mm-hmm.
I saw the hill over there with water that would run down both sides. You've got an alluvial plain down below. You've got a ridge that is primarily stone, let alone, magnetic stone. You've got quartz, a lot of quartz up here, a lot of iron, a lot of conductive material in the stone that comprises the ridge. And it's neat putting science to, the myth, to the story, and science backs it up. Science backed it up out here. Science backed it up at West Kennet. They were onto something there. And I think that I've mentioned this several times, but for my money, that was one of the best books I have ever read. It's perfect. It's like, hey, we want to figure out why are these people taking these seeds to these locations, and why, after they take them out there, do their plants grow stronger, faster, and more resistant to oxidative stress? Well, let's go do it. Let's take some seed out there and try it. And they did, and they measured sites all over the world and found the same thing, that the ancient peoples were able to build these stone structures and channel the Earth's natural electromagnetic energy and create negative ionization, which is good for all living things. So West Kennet specifically, when you talk about the living resurrection, where you walk into a chamber like that, you've got complete sensory deprivation. It could be 100 degrees outside in pure sun, and you're in there and it's pure dark, and it's cool. You're shut off. You stay in there for a while, and then you come out. Oh my God, my knee feels better. Wow, my head feels better. I feel wonderful. I'm blessed.
And when
yeah.
and when Maria has been a guest with us, she's also spoken about these healing properties and this energy, and she and several other researchers are taking the view that these sacred circles were being used as a healing center, just a hospital.
Well, okay, I just told you about those rings that I found on this ridge behind me, less than a mile away, about a mile away.
At the start of the show, yeah, right.
Yeah. Well, before I went up there on that hike, I have rheumatoid arthritis. My left knee was in pain. My left shoulder was in pain. And I thought, God, should I really go? And you got to go up there. You got to go do it. So I did it. I went up there. I sat in the circle. I did ceremony. I opened the directions. I was thankful. I stayed there for maybe 30 minutes. And I came back and I went over to my neighbor's place, who lives a half mile away from me. That's as close as a neighbor should live, by the way. It's perfect. So I go over to his place. He's got a fire going, and I sit down and I stretch my legs out. And I stopped for a second. I go, wait a minute. My pain was gone. I'm moving my elbow. I'm moving my left knee. Now, usually, anybody who has rheumatoid arthritis, I know it's different for everybody, but usually the pains that will go into a joint will at least last for 2 or 3 days. And this was gone. And I'm not attributing it to the circles. I don't know why it was gone. But isn't that kind of odd?
Hey, Dave, if you would, real quick, could you explain to everybody what happens in places of negative ionization, and also within the body of that, briefly touch on those pukas, those Orion-shaped pukas that we saw on the stelae that were on the ground in Takalikabash in Mayaland?
The Orion-shaped pukas?
Yeah, we kept encountering these pukas. Yeah.
That's
right. The pukas, little holes. You forgot. We were puzzling over what they represented, and we were wondering. Yeah, they were little perfectly drilled holes.
Oh, yeah. Well, some not so perfectly. I remember at Takalika, remember the back of that big, the back of the big stone. Boy, that narrows it down.
Yes, it does. But the big stele, the thing is, it's essentially the same thing that you're referring to that was occurring in Europe years ago. That was probably, granted, we didn't have the magnetometer with us, but it's probably the same sort of endeavor. It's like this is a sacred thing that's been constructed to make a conduit from here to the heavens, and so put stones, put them, umbilical cords, whatever in here, blessings.
Yep. Well, and before I got to divert for a second, Mark. Before I forget, I know we're coming up late to the end here, but you mentioned Ross. You mentioned Ross Hamilton, and one of the things we found at Takalika, the one thing that amazes me more than anything, there was a stele, and it aligns perfectly with Draco on December 21st. And below that stele, there's a round stone with 2 footprints in it that aligns in the same alignment. So I know Ross has done a lot of work on Serpent Mound and Draco.
Right.
And I'm looking at this thinking, okay, if you're these people, what are you trying to say by doing that? Is this signifying where we came from, or where we're going back, or where we're going to? I don't know. Pretty interesting, but Rob's been there before. I never had, but he said on his first visit that was not availed.
Well, we actually asked the guide what his impression was, because before, I think the sign may have identified that they were indeed footprints, but I asked, well, those look like footprints. What are they signifying? And he indicated the path that you walk, how you walk back to the place you came from, which according to the signage was not Orion, not the Milky Way, but Draco.
And that was Olmec.
Full on Olmec.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Could that be the beginning? If that was the beginning of the Maya meeting the Olmec, is that the beginning of the serpent worship? Is that the beginning of Kukulkan? I don't know.
Yeah, because Draco is a serpent constellation.
That's right.
Yeah, and
so ponder that one a bit.
Yeah, and when Andrew Collins was a guest with us, he was saying the Denisovans were worshiping the constellation of Cygnus. So that's interesting how we've looked at some of the similarities from around the world, but we're also covering maybe some regional variations over rather lengthy periods of time. But it is the points you bring up are similar about going tracing your way back to a place, but it's two different places between two different cultures. So it's just something to think about.
Well, I think Clifford alluded to that too. Did he? I'm sorry. I seem to remember Clifford alluding to something like that, saying that each or maybe it was Malava mentioning that different indigenous peoples are from different stars, different star systems.
Okay.
Well, I mean, why not?
That would give us the answer right there.
Well, it's kind of like the same. I was going to offer to Dave. It's kind of the Quetzalcoatl Kukulkan thing. It's the same. I mean, it's the same constellation in the stars. It's the same manifestation on the earth of a God perceived with different attributes, but it's different peoples that call the same thing different things, but they're still geographically pretty close to each other.
Right. Well, and another symbol you have on your website that seems to have the universal commonality is the spiral, and that was on the curbstone in front of Newgrange, and then at the Hopi sites. And I don't want to talk about
it occurs everywhere, Mark. I mean, that is the single most universal symbol encountered with any peoples. I mean, the Taino left it, the Hopi left it, the Mayas used it, the Egyptians used it. Everybody employs that symbol. How that possibly occurred historically, that's going to remain a puzzle until somebody can sort that out. But obviously, whatever it represents is valid. It's important.
Yep.
Okay. Hey, we're down to like 5-6 minutes or so. Do you want to plug anything, and Barbara could step in and wrap things up so we don't go over?
All you, Dave.
Well, gee, thanks.
Fair enough.
As far as plugging anything goes, I mean, we're pretty low on self promotion, and that's to our detriment. At the same time, we're going to get back to work. We already have gotten back to work, and this coming year, we're going to be putting a lot more. There's going to be some new stuff up on the site. We're going to work through it. So bear with us, hang with us if you can. But more than anything, my plug would be get outside, go look out your back door and see what you can find, and don't just take what you're listening to and watching on TV verbatim and think that's valid and that's truth, because it certainly is not.
Oh, that's quite
my
the plug. Good for you. Who do you represent?
Yeah, well, and visit Guatemala. I feel like I'm a member of the Guatemala Tourism Board right now.
Is it $10 or $12 for saying that? I'll split it with you.
Yeah, exactly. I get a free Moza next time I go back. And I'll take it, mister.
No
great beer, by the way. Moza, yum. But the gold, not so much the Bach. The Bach's not bad, but the gold, oof, got a winner there.
People have no idea what you're referring to, so I'll try and clarify. There are two types of Moza. beer in that country. The Bock is served in restaurants. The Gold is purchased in stores. You don't want the Bock in restaurants. You want the Gold in stores. Good luck trying to find it. It's one of the best beers on the planet.
It is. It's dark, but it doesn't taste dark. It's amazing.
Nope. I only drank about 400 of them last time we were there.
Yeah, that was a light trip. No.
Well, I know Mark probably has something to say, but I want to congratulate both you and myself. We just did 2 hours, and we were really polite.
That's true.
We were
pretty,
nice.
That's true.
We
were.
Didn't like
And then,
that thing we did.
I intended to get it. I intended to get a little surly.
Well, we don't intend to get surly. It's just kind of our personalities. It's like, pay attention. What are you folks missing? Everything you need to know is out there. Turn that television off and go educate yourselves. But we never did that until now. And now that I'm started, let me tell you something. All right,
okay.
I'll stop.
There we go. And while you're doing that, I'm going to put my pants back on.
Oh,
there we go. Barbara, I had nothing to do with that. You're our second naked
Okay, wait. Before you go any further, I'm going to say good night. We want to thank you guys so very much for being with us tonight. You have been enlightening, entertaining, informative, and everything that a good guest should be. We are thrilled that you were here with us, and we really hope that we can convince you to come back again for almost 2 hours of amazing material, bordering on almost getting surly. So we'll keep you from the surliness. We will thank you again for an amazing show, and we thank everybody for listening and joining us. Please, if you enjoy this show, we're going to have it up on YouTube in the morning, and please subscribe and look for further adventures of these two amazing, wonderful, entertaining men. Good night, everybody.